Hello 5812 CEMBA students. This is a brief recording I've created to go over the course materials and do a little bit of extra detail around the syllabus. All of the material in this presentation is going to be available on the Canvas website for class and in the syllabus there. So I hope you've already taken a look at that as you've started to get into some of the readings before the semester kicks off. But before we start in earnest this week, I wanted to just go over a few things to clarify and help you think about prioritizing and identifying which assignments you'd like to take on for the class. So just the beginning of this recording, I want to talk just a little bit about what the course objectives are going to be for organizational behavior. As you can see on the slide, kind of the primary things I'm looking for here are to introduce you to the topics and ideas of organizational behavior. Ultimately, this is a course understanding people, and in particular, people in organizations. So it makes it different from kind of a straight psychology course, which some of you may have had before, because now we're looking at kind of how people think and behave and feel in organizations as a context and in a work setting. We're going to talk a lot about research. You're at a major leading research institution, and I'm engaged in research as well as most of the faculty here. And we'll do our best to help you understand the evidence for supporting particular pathways in terms of leadership efforts with people, and also reflecting on places where maybe the evidence isn't quite as clear or quite as strong. We're really going to try to think about developing your skills, hands-on, applying these principles to yourself and to your workplace, and as you'll see with the organizational audit group project, also to another organization in more of a consulting role. And I just want to say that it's really my goal to create a class environment where people feel comfortable questioning, reflecting, gathering more information, and really learning from each other. One of the really powerful strengths of CEMBA is the excellent student class we have in terms of the backgrounds, experiences, industries, jobs, and other places that people come. There is so much we can also learn from each other, and the class environment is really important to me to keep things very discussion-based, very interactive, and provide that opportunity to learn as much from me and the content of the course as from each other. So just for the brief course description, again, all of this is on the Canvas site, and these dates and topics are presented in the home page of my Canvas site. But just for a quick overview of what we're going to be doing, we'll be kicking off this course in October. So you'll have one weekend of classes with your other courses before we start organizational behavior. But as we go along, as I mentioned in August, I really recommend that you be reading the books that are assigned for the class, and frankly get reading on the material for that first weekend meeting. We have 2 classes on our first weekend of meetings. This year that's October 4th and 5th. Our first class will do a bit of an introduction and overview, not repeating this, but we'll kick off immediately into the idea of evidence-based management. And we'll talk about what that means. What does it mean to have evidence about leading people and designing organizations to make work both more pleasant and more effective in terms of your workforce? There is a great deal of evidence in the field of organizational behavior, very kind of comprehensive and rigorous scientific research to support particular ways and approaches of designing organizations and leading people. The first weekend I like to classify as thinking a lot about individuals and thinking about topics that are about what kind of makes individuals tick in organizations. So the first day, in addition to kicking off the idea of evidence-based management, we're going to talk about workplace attitudes and engagement and discuss what is engagement. Many of you take engagement surveys at work to understand why do you have to take those surveys and what does it tell us about people's motivation, attachment, and performance at work, both for individuals, but also importantly for you to think about as leaders and future leaders of organizations. What does it mean for the performance and effectiveness of entire organizations? We'll also, in that first day, talk about attitudes. And when we talk about attitudes, we mean things like job satisfaction and organizational commitment, for example, are two that we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about what they help us understand, why we should care about them, and how do we cultivate those in our employees. Our second class, again, still emphasizing individuals, will then get into a very, very important topic, which is motivation. So thinking about driving the behaviors we need from ourselves and others in organizations, we really need to understand human motivation and motivational behaviors. So we will spend a lot of time in that second class thinking about what theories are available to us and how can we apply those theories when we think about trying to motivate the behaviors we desire in ourselves and our employees and avoid behaviors that we don't really like so much. And a big important part of that is the feedback process. That's kind of a monitoring and control process of behavior. And so we'll spend a lot of time on that second class discussing what makes feedback work and effective and high quality feedback. What are the characteristics of good feedback? And we will take an activity that's a role play activity where you'll have 4 little mini cases about scenarios where something's occurring and people need to give feedback, and you'll be asked to prepare some of that before class and then engage in some interactive role play to think about what makes feedback effective. But also think about how that might change if you're giving feedback to a peer or a subordinate or trying to give that to, for example, your boss. That's our first weekend. Our second 2 meetings are not on the same weekend this year. Class 3 is going to be on October 19th, and that class is focusing on power and influence processes in what I like to call the political organization. Politics are part of work, and for some of us that's kind of a dirty word, or we get kind of stressed out thinking about power and politics. But we'll spend this class and this content thinking about the benefits of this and how can you use your power and influence effectively. What are some of the ways to assess yourself in terms of how capable you are at influencing others? And then what are some kind of developmental goals and things that you can do to think about increasing your power and influence in your organization. Our fourth class meeting, which will be November 1st this year, is about decision making and conflict management. Those are 2 very kind of vital processes in organizations, and can occur both with individuals and groups, and things challenge individuals in decision making, and we'll think about what makes decision making more effective or less effective, and what are some practices we can put in place so that we become more effective decision makers and we protect ourselves from some of the common pitfalls in decision making. We'll also talk about conflict management. We'll kind of build on what we did in the study team workshops in August, where we looked at our individual conflict styles. But we'll bridge from that class into our 5th class, which is about teamwork and teaming. So we'll kind of take some of that material thinking about interpersonal conflict and move on to class 5, where we'll get into a focus on groups and teams and collaboration in organizations, and think about how do we generate high performing teams? How do we think about forming those teams, selecting the right individuals, nurturing their performance, and kind of above and beyond what we talked about in the study team workshops, which was pretty internally focused. We're going to think about how teams are important structures in organizations, and how do we think about managing teams and networks of teams to get the best performance out of both those teams and the individuals in them. And then December 6th, we will come into a class about formal control, which I describe as organizational structure and design. So this is where we think about how are we structuring the work environment, who's reporting to who, thinking about classic organizational charts and what do those tell us, what are different approaches to designing organizations. How can we tell if our organization design is working, or if we're having problems at work with people and performance and collaboration? Is it the structure that's doing that? And so therefore would a redesign potentially help us get better productivity out of our workforce? Those are the kinds of questions we'll be discussing in class 6. And then finally, we have a full day class on December 13th, where in the morning we start thinking about what I call informal organization control, which is organizational culture. So organizational culture is a form of controlling behavior because it's using values and meaning to get people to behave the way that we want them to in organizations. And we'll dig into how do we dissect culture? How do we understand culture? What are the concepts and tools that let us do that effectively so we can be better at diagnosing the culture? We can think about, in what ways our culture is supporting our strategy. We can think about, if we want to make strategic changes, is our culture going to get in the way of that? And if we think so, what can we do? I can say right now, you can't change culture very quickly. So we have to think about understanding the culture and trying to move with the culture and leverage the culture in most cases. Which leads us to our final topic, which is leading organizational change. And change kind of takes the whole course together, because if we think about trying to change an organization, we're really changing people. We're changing their hearts and their minds. They have to buy into what we're asking them to do, which requires us to think back to the beginning of class in terms of engagement in their attitudes. Like if people are already having poor attitudes at work, we can guarantee that trying to change that organization is going to be harder. If we understand motivational processes, we can understand what is likely to help motivate people to adopt and kind of buy into the change initiatives we're trying to do. Certainly power and influence processes matter with change. If we lack the ability to influence others, we probably won't be as effective leading change in organizations. Decision-making around those changes, conflicts are natural in change processes because some people stand to win, some people stand to lose, or at least perceive they do, which can generate conflicts in organizations. And finally, change is often around structures like teams or like organizational design. And so we'll think about kind of, if we're trying to move that, how do we think about doing that effectively with understanding things like the organizational culture? So that's a quick tour of the topics that we're going to cover in the class this semester. Kind of to conclude this first short video, just a quick overview of the grading components and distribution in the class. I'm going to film a couple of short videos about each of these topics, so this one doesn't get too long here. But essentially there are these 5 different components of the class. And if we look at this, I'm trying to get my little drawing tool here, see if I can do this. I like that color. Okay, so first of all, we have organizational applications. These are individual papers. There are 2 of them. You will have an opportunity to choose from 4 that are connected to the books. More on that in the next video. We have some cases. We have a total of 4. You will be required to all write up the first one. Again, more on that in a moment. And then you get to choose one of the remaining 3. We will have quizzes that are around 2 classes each, so there's a total of 4 since we have 8 class sessions. And we have this large group project called the Organizational Behavior Audit. I will again provide a little bit more information in a follow-up video in just a moment. And then finally, 5% of the grade are non-graded assignments. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but they involve things like the pre-class survey I mentioned in my email a couple weeks ago. So completing that's required. I don't grade it. You just need to do it so that you get the feedback from that. There is one of the simulations we do in class. you need to do individually outside of class. And so there's a deadline for you to complete that simulation. That is not graded, but it's a required component. So again, in a follow-on video, I will talk a little bit more in detail about those components, but completing those makes up a total of 5% of your grade. So with that, that's just a very quick overview. Please check the links because I'm going to have short videos covering each of these different items in some more detail.